You need to sit.
Okay, we'll bring Farhad up for a later conversation. The Second Baptist Church of Evanston, and we'll be meeting with pastor neighbors there. I just wanted to say a few words about why we thought this was important. This is the second time we've done this tour. Last year we were really excited about the fact that so many religious holidays happened about the same time in the spring. So many different faith traditions are celebrating something or recognizing something in the month of August now this year. And that doesn't happen all the time. In fact, it's like every 19 years that it happens. So we're really excited to team together. There's so many things going on in Chicago. There's all opportunities, but we just wanted to bring people together and explore, be able to talk on a trolley and have some fun and enjoy each other's company, ask questions, and get to know a little bit more about our neighbors and our community. So last year we were on the south side of Chicago. This year we decided to do the north side, and whirlwind experience, because we don't have enough time at any of the sites that we're going to. You're going to leave wanting more, and that's just the nature of it. I think all the communities that we are visiting would tell you they would like you to come back and visit for a longer period of time. So we'll get a taste, and then we'll have more questions and more curiosity about one another, and it will hopefully bring more understanding of who this God, this supreme being is in our life, and accentuate our own faith as well as learning about others. I don't know if anybody has that, but I can certainly, yeah.
Out of respect for our hosts,
leading the Grizzlies by 9. After 3, they go to the 4.
Yes, this first site is the one place that requires masks. I think they will have some masks if you don't have one already with you, but in general, it's I think if you're comfortable wearing masks, it's nice to do so throughout the possible, just so that the people that need it for their own health reasons is helpful. But yeah, this is the one place.
That was 6-1 entering the 9th inning.
Any other questions? The question is if we're well behaved, if we can make this an annual tradition. And there's no doubt that last year when we did this, we had no idea that we would say, oh, we have to do it again. The response was so great. In fact, we had really promoted it quite a bit in the Chicago area. I wrote an op-ed with somebody from the American Islamic College, and it was in many news. We discovered that, yeah, people were really interested and excited about it. I also got a grant from Interfaith America, which once was called Interfaith Youth Corps, who helped sponsor last year, as well as the Parliament of World Religions. And I think the Parliament of World Religions, who's having their big event right here in Chicago this coming summer in August, they I think are planning to do a tour like this as well. So yeah, it's highly likely that we'll continue to do it and find new places each year. I was just at the Mecca Center in Willowbrook on like Wednesday night, I think, and wow, that community has a lot of faith communities right in a very short distance. In fact, we could probably walk instead of taking a trolley, but this is really fun to have the trolleys. So yeah, we want to thank our driver, who is named Carlos. Yeah. I'll apologize ahead of time because we're going to be ushering you in and out, not super quickly, but like I said, just having a taste in each place. But we do need to keep moving so that we can get back in time, and it takes a little while to get everyone in, on and off the buses without, or the trolleys without any injuries or, yeah, those kind of things.
And that number grew a lot during COVID. Now, I'm not going to say that they sit there and watch us for an hour and a half. You know how people are. They may just be surfing the web and all of that, but we're grateful for that as well. So I am grateful for you all, and I'd like to just ask a couple of questions before beginning. Who are y'all? And where are you coming from? Yes. Somebody want to check? You don't all have to answer, but I know this is seminary-related CTS, and you all are you all visiting from the Metro Chicago area? Is that right? Yes?
Some of us are from Evanston.
Some of you from Evanston, and you probably go to LaPeep all the time, which is right next door. Absolutely. Okay.
We have folks from all over. So
From all-
it's Chicago Theological, American Islamic College, Niagara Foundation, and Luther School of Theology, which are sponsoring.
Yes.
And we brought all the folks together, and so people come from all different walks of life, and probably, are living all different places.
Okay, great. What I'd like to do is I'd like to talk to you for about 15 minutes and tell you a little bit about the history of Second Baptist and try to bring it right up to our current time. So in 1882, a group of black members of First Baptist Church, which is now Lake Street Church, located on Chicago and Lake Street, decided that they wanted to leave that congregation and start their own. That church was it was a white church, and there were a handful of blacks who worshiped there, but there was segregation in 1882, and so blacks had to sit in the balcony. They were not afforded an opportunity to be officers of the church, and they certainly couldn't enter into any ministry leadership role. And so a dozen blacks decided that they would write the pastor of the church and ask for a letter of dismissal. That's a part of the Baptist way of formally disengaging from one place and going to another. And so they left, and what I find to be ironic is at the very same time, in the summer of 1882, another group of blacks from First United Methodist Church, which is located on Church and Hinman, just down the road, they also decided to leave at the same time. So there were a group of blacks that decided they wanted to start their own church. Both of these groups, one United Methodist and one Baptist, started meeting in the upstairs of the old post office, not the newer post office that we have, which looks very old right now, but one that was further down Davis, near Orrington. And they started meeting there during the summer, and they decided that they were going to start a church themselves, but guess what happened? Doctrine happened. And so the United Methodists said, no, well, we do things differently. And the Baptists said, we do things differently. So they parted ways. And they continued to work on starting their own houses of worship. And so on October 21st, 1882, Ebenezer African Methodist Episcopal Church was established. And 2 weeks later, Second Baptist Church was started as well. So Ebenezer is the oldest African American congregation on the North Shore. It's located just a couple of blocks away, and Second Baptist is 2 weeks, just a little bit younger than Ebenezer. So that's how the congregation started. They were very small. They struggled an awful lot trying to pay their bills, trying to get themselves established, and most importantly, trying to get a building. So the first building that Second Baptist was able to obtain was an old schoolhouse, and the schoolhouse was located on Hinman and Dempster, and that's where Cara Valley Montessori School is now. It was a public school. The public school decided that it would relocate, and so they sold the building to Second Baptist members, and they put it on rollers, and they rolled it from there actually to this spot. It burned down. It was a wooden building. So it burned down a few years later, so they purchased another building from a United Methodist Church and brought it to this spot as well. And by 1912, they had saved enough money, and they had become developed enough where they decided to build their own church. And so this building was constructed in 1912, and it was dedicated in 1915. So it goes back an awful long ways. There's not much that has really changed. As you can see, it kind of looks like a building that was built in 1912 and dedicated in 1915. The names on the stained glass windows are of some of the folks that contributed pretty significantly to the construction of the building. One name that I think is especially important, that's Mother Garnett, that name right there. Her mom and dad were founding members of the church, but she was Ida Garnett, and Ida Garnett was also an African-American physician. She was one of the first black female physicians in the metro Chicago area, and she decided after practicing in Chicago for a short period of time that she would come back to Evanston and actually found a hospital. It was called a sanatorium. And why do you think she founded a hospital in Evanston? This would have been 1920s.
Because of the pandemic?
Well, that's a good guess, but not quite.
Segregation.
So you did have St. Francis Hospital that was up and running at that time, but they did not accommodate Negroes at the time. So if you were sick and had to go to the hospital and you were black, then you had to go all the way down into Chicago to find a hospital. And so Dr. Garnett, along with a few others, started the first colored hospital in Evanston. And it's over on Simpson Street, and the building still exists, but it's being used for a senior citizen congregate care center right now. So that was amazing. I got to tell you a personal story because, you know, preachers like to tell stories, and Baptist preachers really like to tell stories. So I do have a personal kind of affiliation with Evanston, and I didn't know it until I became interested in Second Baptist Church and threw my hat in the ring to potentially be called as the pastor. I found out at that time from my mother that her grandmother and grandfather lived in Evanston. And as a little girl, she and her siblings would come over and spend parts of the summer in Evanston starting in 1924. In 1924. So when I told her that I was interested in going to Evanston, a floodgate of memories opened up, and she began to share information that I didn't know anything about. I knew about my mother's paternal side of the family. We went to family reunions every year, but for some reason she never talked about the maternal side of her family, and that would have been her grandmother, Alice Ampey Jones Sparks, who actually moved into Evanston in 1893 and worked as a domestic and lived on Dempster Avenue for many, many years. After she had been here, I think in about 1905 or 1906, she married someone. She married a young man. Now, don't you all talk about my great-grandmama, but I think she may have been a gold, I don't know what you call it. Cougar, maybe. I don't know what you call it. She married somebody that was 30 years younger than her. And it was her second marriage. Now, that's very unusual in the early 1900s. But she married well. He was a doctor. He was a podiatrist. And he had his own office here. And I was just absolutely amazed to hear all of this information. They built a home. The home still stands. It's on 1747 Gray Avenue, just a stone's throw from the high school. I also learned after coming here and digging into some research for myself that my great-grandfather, who was a podiatrist, had an office from 1927 to 1940, get this, at 1617 Benson Avenue. You're standing at 1717 Benson Avenue. It's just a block away where the Davis Street parking lot is right now. So I'm just amazed. I didn't know those great-grandparents. I didn't know anything about them, but it was quite a sort of, to me, a very amazing encounter with the divine. When I found out about that, I really sensed and felt like God was calling me into the Evanston community. And so I did. I applied for the church, and fortunately, I was called to serve as pastor in June of 2015. And so going back to some of those first pastors, the first pastor that I think really left an imprint on the church, his name was Richard DeSable. And Richard DeSable pastored this church for only a couple of years, from 1892 to 1894. But he is also one of the founders of the Olivet Baptist Church. And Olivet Baptist Church in Chicago is the oldest Baptist church in Metro Chicago altogether. It was absolutely I don't know if you can call the church a prima donna church, but it was the major church for African Americans who were part of that big migration out of the South beginning in the early part of the 20th century. And so he would go around and help found churches. He helped to found this one. Another significant pastor in the history of the church was the Reverend Dr. William Holmes Borders. Dr. Borders was a student at Garrett Theological Seminary working on what they called then a Bachelor's of Divinity. Now they would call it a Master's of Divinity. He earned his degree, and in his last year, the church was opened, and they called him to be a pastor in 1931. He served here from 1931 until 1937. He was able to help the church to retire all the debt that it had, and then he got called to a really nice church in Atlanta, Georgia. And he became the pastor of Wheat Street Baptist Church starting in 1937. By 1940, Wheat Street Baptist Church was the largest Protestant church in the United States of America. He had over 12,000 members. And not only did he have over 12,000 members, but he had a radio program. You know, every preacher in the world has a radio program or a TV ministry now, but back then it was very, very rare. And I think that's how his congregation began to grow by leaps and bounds, because his program came on every Sunday evening. And how many of you know one of the famous speeches of Jesse Jackson, who would say, "I am somebody, I may be black, but I am somebody, I may be poor, but I am somebody"? That was a real mantra of Jesse Jackson. Guess where Jesse Jackson got it from? He got it from William Holmes Borders, who wrote an amazing poem called "I Am Somebody," set it to music with his chancel choir, and it became absolutely one of the most phenomenal pieces for the next 20 or 30 years, from the 1930s all the way to the 1950s. And Jesse repopularized that in the early 1970s. So after William Holmes Borders, we had the pastor who had the longest tenure here. His name was Nathaniel Hawk. Nathaniel Hawk was a military person. He had served in the military and retired from the military after 20 years service as a chaplain, and he was called here and served for just about 35 years. After Nathaniel Hawk, the second longest tenure was Heisel B. Taylor, and Heisel B. Taylor was also a phenomenal amazing pastor in this church for about 31 years. He was a professor at Vanderbilt Divinity School. When he was called to come into Evanston, it wasn't to pastor this church, it was to become an administrator at Garrett Seminary. He arrived in around 1973 and took over a couple of positions at Garrett Seminary. And then when the church became available again on the retirement of Reverend Hawk, he became the pastor of the church. Now, listen, he was gifted. He was talented. He was an absolute Renaissance man. He was an artist without peer. He was a trained professional singer who sounded like an opera singer, like Paul Robeson or somebody like that. Just incredible. He served here for 31 years. And then Mark Dennis came. Mark Dennis is my immediate predecessor. He served for 12 years here. And Mark Dennis was an amazing Renaissance man as well. I'm not sure how well he sang, but he was trained as a gifted organist. And he was one of the greatest organists in the community for the years that he was here. Now, then they called me, Michael Neighbors from Detroit. I can't sing. I don't have rhythm. I can't play any instrument at all. I'm not exactly sure why they called me, but it has been a great situation for the 8 years that I have been here. Second Baptist, during all of that time, but especially under Heisel Taylor, really became known as a progressive Baptist congregation. They became involved in amazing social justice issues. Reverend Taylor, Pastor Taylor, brought on the first full-time woman as an executive minister here at the church. Her name was Brenda Little, and she would go on to serve as pastor of Bethany Baptist Church here in Evanston as well. He also was responsible for ordaining the first women to be deacons, the first women to be trustees, the first women in ministry, and this was in the mid-1970s. He was chastised, he was criticized by folks in the community because they were not nearly as progressive as Second Baptist Church, but he went ahead and did it anyway. So he became very well known for his progressivism. As a matter of fact, in 1984, when Jesse Jackson announced his bid to run for President of the United States, he asked Heisel Taylor to become the president of Rainbow Coalition and Operation Push. So for 2 years, he was serving as the president of those social justice organizations while also serving as the pastor of this congregation. So those are real amazing shoes. You can't fill those shoes when you think about the pastors who were here. But what I tried to do is I tried to come in with whatever I felt like God had given me and to work in the community in an area that I thought I might be able to contribute. So for the last 8 years, we've been pretty involved. And when I arrived in 2015, there's one advantage. If any of you are seminary students, let me tell you, if you ever become a pastor, there is an amount of time when you become a pastor of a church for the first time where you can almost do anything. The folks love you. They appreciate you, whether you're single or a family. It's called the honeymoon stage. And you go in and people are excited. They don't want to, hurt your feelings or anything like that, so you can do this or that. When they called me, I was in my 50s. I've been through a couple of honeymoon stages already with previous churches. So I knew that I was able to get a lot of things done, and I figured I better try to get as much done in the first couple of years as I possibly could. So in the summer of 2015, we had a tragedy that happened in the United States, and that was the shooting in Charleston at Mother Emanuel, and it was terrible. There were 9 people that were killed. So one of the things that we did immediately is we said, let's call the community together and have a community lament service. And we had that service right here. Even though we accommodate only 325, 600 people showed up. A year later, we had the tragedy at Club Pulse in Orlando in 2016. We did the same thing. 900 people showed up. We can accommodate 325. They were all downstairs in the fellowship hall. They were in the ladies' lounge. We lined chairs up here. There were people who were seated here. And I got so worried because I thought somebody's going to call the fire department. We're going to have to stop this service. And then I looked out and I saw the fire chief seated in his house. Right where you are, right there. I said, I'm in good shape. We're going to be okay. We're going to be all right. And so we began to gain a kind of reputation, I guess, for being one of those houses of worship that are involved. And so I'm going to stop right there because I know we're out of time. Any Q&A? Any Q&A at all?
I wish we could take some time to do Q&A,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, you gotta go.
You know, I think maybe I told everybody when we started that this is going to be a taste. It's going to be you're welcome back
Yeah.
anytime to learn more,
Anytime.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
And there are people on the trolley that can and at the Iftar this evening that can answer some questions about some of the Christian holidays that are happening right now. So we're so thankful that we got to hear the history of this place and get to meet you. So we're going to have to usher everyone out again.
Amen. I had about another hour, I want y'all to know.
Yeah.
So, but thank you very much.
Architectural elements that I would like you to keep in mind as you go through your self-guided tour. The temple uniquely reflects a blending of architectural elements, for example, the use of Muslim-inspired arabesques, and there are no likenesses of any living living things at the temple. Some of the Western elements that you will see will include the Byzantine dome.
It was a choir loft. Right where I'm standing here used to be the very back of the sanctuary space, where there was a big organ, which there is a pretty significant organ tradition in Jewish music as well, so I was heartbroken to learn that I would have once had access to that, but we have to make do with this lovely piano instead, I should say kiddingly. So at any rate, it used to be the back of the sanctuary. These were the church offices back here, and when they purchased the building, they pushed those spaces out to make it one big sanctuary space. Why am I telling you about a church when we're in a synagogue? This is, again, a very special synagogue in a number of ways, but really one of the key ways is that Sukkot Shalom was founded by interfaith families. So we're particularly delighted to welcome the Interfaith Trolley tour today, very much in line with who we are. So our founding Rabbi, Sam Gordon, founded the congregation knowing that there was a need, not only in the Chicago area, but nationally, for Jewish people married to non-Jewish people to have a spiritual home. We are not an interfaith, we do not celebrate Christmas, right, in this building, but many of us return home to Christmas trees, myself included. My wife is Presbyterian. So, at any rate, within the Jewish community, that is and was a pretty significant ongoing debate. Should spouses who are not Jewish be welcomed into Jewish spaces? Our rabbi, myself, our community believes the answer is resoundingly yes, and so Sukkot Shalom was born. Really a very radical synagogue at the time, and we are very happy that the landscape has very much changed throughout the country and internationally as well, and there has been an enormous amount of progress made in terms of the acceptance of interfaith families into Jewish spaces. So we're very proud of that background, very, very proud of that heritage, if you will, although heritage feels like a strong word to use for a not quite 30-year-old organization. But that's our story in a nutshell. I will just direct your attention to a couple of key spiritual, what's the word I'm looking for? Jewish pieces of symbolism that can be found throughout the sanctuary. And then really I'll be done talking. I'll allow any questions at all that you have that I feel like I'm equipped to answer. And if I'm not equipped to answer, we can go to everybody's favorite rabbi, Rabbi Google. And then after that, not my joke, but a good one. After that, I thought we could pull out our Torah and actually have a chance to look at that. I know that, I assume we have some Christian friends in the room, yes? So we're coming up on Easter, and we're in the midst of Ramadan, right? Yes? And Jews are on the precipice here of celebrating Passover. So we'll pull the Torah open and look at the Passover story as it appears in our sacred text. But just like I said, to direct your attention to a couple pieces of symbolism throughout the room. So we'll start up on this platform here. This is what's called the bima. It's just a raised platform from which we direct our services. Sanctuaries such as these are very Ashkenazic. Has anybody ever heard that word, Ashkenazic? So Ashkenazic heritage refers to people of Jewish descent from Eastern Europe or other parts of Europe. Sephardic Judaism is found much more in the Iberian Peninsula, in North Africa, and in the Middle East. And Sephardic synagogues actually conduct services in the round. So if you were in a Sephardic synagogue, this bima would be in the center of the room. At any rate, so bima, reading table, this is our ark, our Aron HaKodesh, which contains right now our Torah scroll. If you'd like to rise, you can. You don't have to. That is a traditional sign of respect when we see the Torah. But the Torah is in here right now. We have 3 Torah scrolls in this community, 2 of which we read from very regularly, one of which we read from only on the holiest day of the year, Yom Kippur. The reason we do that is not for any particular religious reason. It's just a very fragile Torah. The Torah that we're not going to see today was actually in Kristallnacht, which was the pogrom conducted against the Jewish community throughout Germany in 1938. And if you open it up to certain parts of the scroll, there are motorcycle tracks that run over the Torah. So we've chosen not to, that the Nazis would have made with their motorcycles. We have chosen not to have that scroll repaired. We consider it just to be a special and holy part of history, as hard as it is to think about. So at any rate, I'll close this now so you can have a seat. We'll get a chance to actually look in the scroll in just a few moments. Above us, so our congregation's name is Sukkot Shalom, which literally translates to a shelter of peace, and part of the evening liturgy that Jews say on every single night, if you are someone that prays every single night, is a prayer called the Hashkivenu, which is where the text Sukkot Shalom comes from. We ask God to spread over us a shelter of peace as we prepare for the evening. And that's the text that you see above you. I don't know if you're able to quite see on this side here, but we have blessed is the one who spreads over us a shelter of peace. And then in Hebrew, Baruch atah Adonai hapareis aleinu Sukkot Shalom. So that's that piece. These 2 tapestries on the wall here actually go back to a little bit of the history I shared with you of the origins of Sukkot Shalom. So Sukkot Shalom, very young organization, right? Not even 30 years old. Interfaith, founded by interfaith families, specifically for interfaith families. And go figure, when Sukkot Shalom was a very young organization, they were meeting in community centers, in high schools, and in churches. We have very, very, to this day, close relationships with First Congregational Church of Wilmette, which was our spiritual home for quite some time. And they understood, they have a lot of symbology in their own sacred space, a lot of crucifixes, depictions of Jesus, things like that. But they understood that when Jews wanted to come into that space and pray, that we did not necessarily want that symbology around us. So we made these tapestries that we used to cover the crucifix and to cover the depictions of Jesus when we would go in on Friday nights, and then we would take those tapestries down to return it to a church space. So when we bought this building, those tapestries for the people who had been at Sukkot Shalom from the very beginning were very dear to them because that was what marked their sacred space. These 2 pieces of tapestry. So they hang out permanently in our sacred space. At the back of the sanctuary, you see these stones and these rows of name plaques, and that is what's called a yahrzeit wall. So yahrzeit is a word that translates to anniversary of death, essentially. It's very traditional in most Jewish cultures to observe anniversaries of death for friends and loved ones. So there's a lot of rules surrounding periods of mourning in the acute moment. So if someone has just passed away, there's all these rules you have to follow for 7 days, first 30 days, first year after someone has passed. But then beyond that, it's very traditional to continue to mark the anniversary of the passing as years go by. It's also very traditional in a lot of synagogues to have a wall where you actually have the names of members of the congregation who have passed away, and when it is their anniversary of death, you can mark that, you can show on the wall in some way, shape, or form that this deceased person's yahrzeit is during this week. So there's a few different ways of doing that. A very common way in a lot of synagogues is to have a little light or something that stands in for like a little flame or candle that is lit when that person's anniversary of death is approaching. We have chosen to actually have a wall where you can place stones on the person's name. When you visit a Jewish grave in a cemetery, it is customary to let someone, the person, know that you've been there by placing a stone on their grave. So we place stones here on our site wall. I'm trying to think if I missed anything in the space. I don't think I did. Obviously, there's a lot of cool tech around too. We have to stream everything we do, so you notice our microphones and our cameras here. But that's, yes, we can jump right to questions.
This shape reminds me of an arc.
I'm so glad you noticed. Yes, the statement was, the shape reminds you of an arc. And actually, if you want to take a moment and stand up and turn around, you can notice that the hues of the pews and the chairs and the color of the carpet is very wavy, very watery. So the shape of this building, like I said, we did not design this building at all. This was built well before Sukkot Shalom was around, but we really leaned into the Noah's Ark idea when we redid the upholstery in here. So good eye, good for you. Yes? That's a great question. I really should have said that already, so thank you. The language that we conduct some of our services in is Hebrew. So that's a great question. I don't even know the answer. Does anybody go to services where you attended the service in 100% a language other than English? Raise your hand if that is the case for you. So that is the case for a lot of Jews as well. You might go to a service and enter in America and enter the walls of the synagogue, and from that point forward you would only hear Hebrew. That is not how we conduct our services, although a good portion of our services are in Hebrew. When we give directions for page turns, and when our rabbis want to teach the congregation something, they speak to the congregation in English. A lot of the singing and chanting that I do is in Hebrew, although, again, we do use a lot of English, even in our liturgy as well, which is, I'm not going to say uncommon. Matter of fact, it's, I would say, very common for what are called Reform Jews, which is a denomination of Judaism. That's the denomination that Sukkot Shalom is in. It's part of what's called the liberal progressive movement in America. There is no attachment to politics in that descriptive language, but the liberal progressive movement of Judaism in this country. Conservative Jews are a little more adherent to the laws as they might be understood from the Torah, a little more Hebrew, longer services, and then you get into the Orthodox Hasidic branches, which are more and more observant as you go. So that was a very long answer to your question. The short version is we speak Hebrew in our services. Yes?
Yes, I'm familiar with a lot of symbols or analogies to trees, and I notice in the Old Testament or the Torah, or however you want to refer to it, and I'm admiring your carpentry, and I'm curious if you have any special wood or if there's a story behind these beautiful cabinets.
So actually, I'm glad you noticed they're beautiful. When we bought this building, we needed to furnish it, and actually, all of not the chairs, but this piece, and the ark are handmade by a congregant who is a completely, amazingly talented furniture maker. So in terms of the design of this furniture specifically, it was designed to match the wood in this building. These columns existed, right? So we wanted to make it look nice. But since you said it, there is a deep connection to trees in Judaism. We actually have a whole holiday that is dedicated to the birthday of the trees. It's called Tu B'Shvat. It's around February-ish. And actually, the Torah, which we just saw, is often referred to as the tree of life. Okay, so trees are a big deal in Judaism. We love trees. What else do I have to say about that? I think that's it. And were you expecting me to say something else? No?
The wood is cherry, and I thought there might be some symbols or some special connection there.
So in the Torah, there's very specific direction given to, the Ark of the Covenant, which held the Ten Commandments. Very specific direction given to how that's constructed, how big it is, what wood it should be made of, etc. Other materials that should be used. At this point, temples don't adhere to those rules anymore to store our Torahs. Absolutely most arcs are works of art, but there's no formula that we necessarily need to follow. Yes?
And the lighted flame above?
Great question. So that is the eternal flame. We have a second one actually. So those never go out. Those are constantly burning.
And there's symbolism with that.
Yes. Actually, can anyone? There's a lot of symbolism that you might assign to eternal flame, but can anyone think of one Passover story related? Yes. That's okay. Go ahead. Yes, that's one of them. So Judaism is an old religion, right? 4,000 or 5,000 years old, depending on who you talk to. So as with anything, there's a number of different answers that come from any. What does this mean? Well, it depends who you ask. But the burning bush is a significant one. The other piece, also related to the Passover story, would be the image that God took as the Israelites wandered in the Sinai desert by night, a pillar of fire. So lots of images of enduring flame. Yes?
Have you ever had any members of this congregation that were Holocaust survivors?
That's a great question. Yes, we have. So there have not been as many direct survivors. As a matter of fact, in my tenure here, I'm coming up on 7 years, and a direct member of the congregation who was herself a Holocaust survivor, there was only one. But there are a number of congregants whose parents are Holocaust survivors, who, their parents are not necessarily members, dues-paying members of the congregation, but come around often, and we spend time with them for their family's life cycle events. So that's, I would say, not uncommon situation for a lot of synagogues, although as the years go on, obviously the survivors, thankfully they had the chance to grow old, as many people did not, but they're getting old. The youngest Holocaust survivors at this point are in their 70s. So that we are losing that generation, thankfully to old age as it should be, but to have the privilege of meeting with a survivor and learning from them, and if you are so lucky as to hear their story, is becoming a rarer and rarer occurrence. So, you've all taken advantage of the Interfaith Trolley tour today. I'm assuming this group of people has, some interest in religion and story and things like that. So, highly encourage you, if you ever do have the chance to spend time with a survivor, whether or not it is to hear what happens to them directly, would encourage you to take advantage of that, because we will all, I think, live to see the time where that is no longer an option, simply because they will have passed away. Great question. I want to be mindful of time and give everyone the chance to come up and see the sacred scroll if they'd like. Yes? So give me a second to get it ready, and then I'll call some people up. Like I said, you can choose to stand or not. If standing is uncomfortable for you, you do not have to stand. If you would like to, you are welcome to as we get the Torah out. All right, Dan, you can have a seat.
Can I notice the couple are similar to the...
Yes, yep, exactly. So, yes, this gentleman here noticed that the mantle has very similar symbolism to the tapestries on the wall here. They were made by the same person, so that would explain that. Let's say, how many are we? You know what? I think we can do it. Let's go one side at a time. Let's go this side first. If you'd like to come up and take a look at the Torah, you can. Come on up.